really excited to be here today. I know that we're being called the troublemakers. And just to really lean into that, we're going to switch up some of the speakers on you. Oh, thank you. Amy, do you want to go next to Greg?
Yeah.
Great. So you're going to notice an extra person on the stage. That's because we're running a little late in our schedule today. So Octopus is going to do some magic, quite fitting for the name, actually, of just changing and camouflage, right? So Greg, before you have to duck off, I'm going to start with you, and then Philip, I'm going to come over to you and ask the exact same question. What brought you here? What brought your companies into heat pumps?
For those who don't know Octopus, we call ourselves an energy transition business. Our job is to drive the renewable transition around the world faster and cheaper than anyone imagined. And yet, a couple of years ago, I sat back and had to have an honest conversation with myself. We've got 3.5 million household customers, and most of them buy gas from us. We're meant to be a clean, renewable transition business, and yet, actually, I think we're in the top 10 sellers of carbon dioxide in the UK. And I asked myself that question. I said, how can we call ourselves a renewable business when we're selling gas to millions of households? And I really thought hard, because at the time I was being very critical of oil and gas companies denying climate change, or now denying the solutions to climate change. And I thought, actually, are we doing the same? And so I thought very hard about actually just stopping selling gas. I thought that is a statement when we turn off a multi-billion-dollar revenue stream because it's the wrong thing to do. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that our customers rely on us to provide the power and the heat for their home. And if we stop selling the gas, then we lose those customers. They still need to heat their homes. So what we had to do is think about, how do you heat homes without gas? How do we make ourselves, our own gas business, redundant? How do I kill off a multi-billion-dollar business we have and replace it with something that I can feel proud about, not slightly ashamed of? And I think the answer, when you look at that, there's only two ways we're going to decarbonize heating at scale. One of them is heat pumps, and there's hydrogen. Now look, as an energy retailer, frankly, we should be indifferent. It doesn't matter what I sell. It goes down the pipes and the wires, people pay for it, hurrah, our business is great. That's the way energy suppliers and retailers have often thought about this. But when we looked at the economics and the physics, I couldn't, in any conscience, believe in a hydrogen future. There are only two ways you make hydrogen at scale, really. I mean, if you're going to be clean, one's blue hydrogen, the other's green. Blue hydrogen requires enormous quantities of carbon capture and storage, which, by the way, hasn't been done at scale anywhere successfully ever. At least, I'm told 99% of the times it's been tried, it hasn't worked. And even when it does work, there's leakage, and more importantly, you've got to pay for gas and then do a load of stuff to it, and then do a load of stuff to bury the effluent, and then you've got to upgrade the entire pipe network right to the point that someone burns it. And you've got to do that for every single home to make hydrogen work. This is astonishingly complicated and expensive. Or we go green hydrogen, in which case you create some green electricity, and for every kilowatt hour of green electricity you create, end to end, if you're lucky, you get half a kilowatt hour of heating. Meanwhile, if you do a heat pump, you create a kilowatt hour of green electricity, and by the end, you've got 3 kilowatt hours of heat. I know the figures vary for different types of heat pumps, so broadly speaking, let's say we get a 3x multiple as a baseline, and we can beat it. So it's either a product that is 6 times more efficient than hydrogen, or one that is up against an unknown, moonshot, never going to work, massively expensive project in blue hydrogen. So heat pumps are the only answer if you look at the physics and the economics. That's why we decided we would go all in on heat pumps. I've got to say, by the way, because I have to leave very shortly, I think the single biggest threat to an astonishingly clean, cheap, consumer-friendly future in heat pumps is the hydrogen lobby. And if I've got one plea for everyone here, it is do not underestimate the fact In London, in the House of Commons in London, there are 120 hydrogen lobbyists. There are only 600 MPs. It's one for every 5 or 6 MPs. That's how powerful the hydrogen lobby is. I was at the Labour Party conference. So for those of you who don't know British politics, Labour Party is possibly going to be our next government. Their conference, the single biggest presence was the hydrogen lobby, right? And the challenge with hydrogen is if they persuade governments to invest tens and hundreds of billions of euros in changing pipe networks and in the creation of green hydrogen or blue hydrogen, whatever they end up doing, we will only ever be a niche sector. Because we'll be competing against massive socialized costs that everyone will pick up. So right now, I ask everyone to double down the effort to prove to citizens, governments, and the media that heat pumps are the answer. Because we know the physics and we know the economics. And that means we have to challenge ourselves to move from a world where heat pumps are currently, in most countries, a relatively small market of expensive products subsidized by governments, to one that is the mass market, the natural solution, the natural replacement for a gas boiler, because it's cost comparable, certainly on a lifetime basis and probably on a short run basis. And it's better for consumers. So we need to put all our effort now into making sure that politicians who are making decisions about the future of heating know that this is the right way to go. Otherwise, society faces the biggest mistake in my lifetime if it invests in the wrong solution. So my plea, the reason we're here today, is to bring people the cheapest, fastest decarbonisation through electrification of everything. Thank you.
So one last question, you have to run, okay?
Oh, it's
so it's going to have to
I did it on time.
It's going to have to be like, a 5-word answer probably. That was your closing statement for today in 2022. If we have you back here in 2025, what's your new closing statement going to be?
Okay, so by 2025, I really hope that we haven't. I hate to bang on about hydrogen. I want to talk about heat pumps. It's just if we don't understand that governments today are risking putting in so much into hydrogen they can't backtrack. So I really hope that by 2025, no one is talking about. I mean, hydrogen's amazing for some stuff, right? Like explosions. But I'm joking, it's not, it's perfectly safe sometimes. But the reality is that the idea of hydrogen for heating homes at scale is dead, and that heat pumps are increasingly a choice, a consumer, at the point that gas boiler dies, the natural choice is a heat pump. And it's a heat pump powered increasingly by renewables, and it's using smart grid controls to make sure that instead of it being a burden on our electricity system, it's the perfect partner for electric vehicles and renewable generation.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Can I hand over to my incredible colleague Amy now as I run, and thank you all indeed.
So to start helping to make Greg's dream a reality here, I think we'll try not to talk about hydrogen again for the next 20 minutes. And Philip, I'd love to hear from you. Again, you're a new company to this room, and I'd love to hear what brought you here.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, because we were here for the dinner last night, and like you said, it's the very first time we were here. And as a European business leader, I have to say, shame on me. This is only my second time I'm in Brussels. And so the very first commitment I'm making is that we as a company got to show up much more often, be here. It was very good yesterday, but also today. And secondly, this is really a room that understood, I think, that it's not only about manufacturing, but really about, if you really want to scale that market, about what's also happening after manufacturing, so X factory, if you want. And that's exactly where we come in. So we launched the company in 2013, really believing that if you want to be successful in the energy transition, it will be also about heat. It will be about 1 and 2 family homes. And if you believe it'll be about 1 and 2 family homes, you need to scale something that nobody's ever scaled before. And that is millions of mini projects, right? And homes are all different, and technical labor is scarce. And yet you got to find ways to standardize that, and most importantly, to make it as simple as possible for customers. So the very first thing we did back then was to write code, right? So we are a company that operates on our own software stack. And that is, for instance, a planning algorithm that, gives us a precise bill of quantity, but also all kinds of processes, including subsidy processes and so on. Now, what we had to learn over the past years was it's not only about reducing CO2 by, let's say, 30 or 50% or 60%, which what we did with our solutions, but it's really about going to net zero. And there's only one option to do that at scale, and that is the heat pump. So that's why, kind of 2 years ago, and with the benefit of hindsight, we should have taken that decision earlier. We decided to fully embark on the heat pump, launched the product, had a range of pilots, and now are in full-on scaling mode since June. And we're doubling our output weekly right now. So we'll probably not too far away from being the largest installer of heat pumps, planner and financier of heat pumps in Europe.
It's fantastic. So both of you guys have been seeing incredible growth within your heat pump industry, despite being really recent entrants into it. Granted, heat pump industry is growing quite a lot right now. I think for, maybe the first time in a bit, maybe this has been true for a couple of years, we can officially say customer acquisition is not the challenge at the moment. So what are the challenges that are facing you right now within the heat pump space?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. The only reason they are challenges is because we've actually got more demand than we can cope with, essentially, at the moment, which is a great position to be in, right? So all we need to do is scale up our capacity to be able to meet that. So, I mean, the sort of three things people talk about is compatibility. And to be honest, I really don't see that as a challenge. So I'll talk about the UK market because I know that best, which is probably one of the hardest ones actually to tackle. But even within that, about 20% of homes are kind of heat pump ready today with an off-the-shelf solution. I'd say there's another 40%, which, okay, you might need a little bit of insulation, for example, which is a very low cost measure. And actually, we've got a real opportunity as part of this heat pump rollout to do some of those things and to improve the quality of our housing stock. The other ones are installation capacity, but I think both Tamondo and Octopus have shown that you can scale that very quickly. I mean, both the UK and Germany and lots of other countries have huge numbers of gas installers or oil installers who, their profession has to change with all these new policies coming in. And actually, it's relatively easy to upskill those people. And then the final thing is supply chain. I know there's been a huge focus on that in Germany in particular. And we do have a lot of European capacity, which is great. So there are challenges there, but I think they're all surmountable within our grasp.
Yeah.
If I may add, I mean, just some numbers. So the European heat pump market is growing at 30% year on year, same in Germany. Demand is quite likely growing at 600-700%, right? So if you just take the keyword set heat pumps to go to Google and go look at that data, it's growing like 3 to 7x depending on the month you look at, right? If you then factor in that there's now a positive business case for switching from a gas boiler in Germany, a country that historically has had ultra low gas prices and now has significant increase in that commodity price. Power went up too, but not as much. So there's just a business case for every homeowner to go for our rental solution, right? So you start saving money on that first day, right? And so that's there's a before and after. And I think we should all acknowledge that, the world simply has changed massively and quite likely it's never going to go back. Now, and I think the second item is there are tons of challenges. Obviously skilled labor is a challenge and training people is a challenge. But I think what companies like ours can bring to the table, and I think it's really important for manufacturers I would ask them to take that away, is really, we are geared to scale. That's what we are good at. We're good at solving problems. We're good at building companies. We're good at doing some backward engineering, saying, okay, if I want to do 50,000 heat pumps in 3 years, what do I need to do today to get there, right? So and that's what we really bring to the table. And I think it needs that mindset to really go for completely different growth rates. I mean, 30% growth is nice, but Germany wants to have 6 million heat pumps by 2030. So we need to have very different growth rates.
Absolutely.
We need to have market growth rates of 150%. And I think that takes a shared an effort of everybody in the room.
It's completely true. It's what our analysis shows as well. You have to be getting into triple-digit growth rates to hit the net zero targets and the 2030 ones as well. It's a huge amount of task to go. I think this is fantastic because if I had been asked back in 2018 when we started our heat analysis at BNEF what the main challenges were, it was probably going to be trying to make an economic case for heat pumps and then also finding customers for heat pumps because the two were very hand in hand, right? And then the third was going to be installers. And now I think you've just told me that we are seeing economic cases for heat pumps today. So Amy, I'd love to come to you on that for a second here. How's the economic case changed, especially in light of the current energy crisis here in Europe?
Yeah, so generally, I mean, nobody likes the crisis that's going on, and there's not many good things to come out of it. But one of the few things is it is making people realize our over-reliance on fossil fuels. And actually, with the basic economics, solutions like heat pumps are becoming much cheaper versus those solutions, the fossil fuel ones. And that varies a lot across Europe. So in the UK, you know, with the way our gas and elec is priced, there's a bit of a saving. In Germany, I know it's huge. So I would personally like to see, you know, those economics addressed, because these are global commodities. The pricing should be the same. But that difference is how we tax those fuels, how we apply network infrastructure costs and that sort of thing. And we could do more, and policymakers in particular could do more to make the case even better.
Absolutely. And Philip, this situation in Germany where now a heat pump can save you money, I think, Amy, you previously made, for some homes, 60% of your energy bills, right? How has that affected what you're seeing on the ground?
I mean, demand is not an issue. So we call it the rule of three. As long as power is not 3 times more expensive than gas, then it does make economic sense to go for a heat pump. And in addition, you don't even need like liquidity for that, because you just go for a rental model. Let's assume it's 200 euros a month for 15 years, and you kind of save 250 to 300 euros a month on your gas bill. So it's automatic savings. And I think it's the job of policymakers to make sure that that rule of three is kind of like respected, right? So, like you said, there's way too many levies and taxes on German power. And power, we had the second, or still have the second highest power price and some of the lowest gas prices. So that's just bad for the heat pump. You see it in countries like France and Sweden that have cheap nuclear power. I'm not an advocate of nuclear power, clearly not, but it does help the heat pump, right? And so we need to make sure that these two commodities are priced in a way that it does make sense to both people.
You mentioned here your rental model. This new pricing environment that we're entering, we've been in it with some markets already. France has had this for a while, but Germany is a new market, I would say, for this rule of three rule to apply. This is opening up new opportunities for innovation, right? So both of your companies have been very innovative, I'd say, within the European heat pump space. Phil, perhaps you could start by talking a little bit about your rental model, and then we can turn over to Amy to hear a bit about Octopus's goal of 50% CapEx reduction.
Yeah, so the rental model does two things, right? It's a one-stop shop product for consumers. So everything and anything is in that one monthly installment. You can go for 2, 10, and 15-year contracts. So the 2-year contracts are for those Germans that love cash. You know, Germany is a cash culture, and we still tell them we do want to make sure that for the first 2 years we'd be in charge of your product, because we assume full operational responsibility, right? So it's really transferred to us. And number two, it really opens up a financial product, right? So we turned heat pumps and boilers into a bankable product. And that was quite some innovation needed to get there, and to talk a lot to lenders. But what it does, and we'll be probably half a year away from issuing our first green bond, so securitizing that, it really does, if you want, democratize also access to green investments, so that it produces yield for investors in times of not as low anymore, but until recently very low yield times.
Yeah, absolutely. And Amy, your innovations have been, I mean, similar in terms of the vertical integration, but much more focused on the manufacturing.
Yeah, so our main focus really has been, how do we make heat pumps those no-brainer replacements for gas boilers, which is what most people have. And the key reason they weren't at the time was because of cost. So we've been ruthlessly looking at every aspect of the heat pump cost, which is a mixture of the installation process, it's the materials you use, it's the supply chain is a big factor into that, and how efficiently you bring everything together. And there's a great analogy that Greg talks about from Steve Jobs, where he was first presented the iPod, and he said, well, can we make it smaller? And they said, no, absolutely not, we can't make it smaller. And then he dropped it in a fish tank and air bubbles came out. And he said, okay, so you can do that. And it's the same thing as heat pumps. They've been around such a long time, it's such an age-old technology that I think people just assumed there's not much that can be done, but there's huge inefficiencies built into the entire process. So that's what we're doing, and we're at the point now where we can pretty much offer heat pumps at a similar price to a gas boiler with the UK government grant. Where we'd like to be in the future is where we can do that without a grant. And for that, we really need standardization, focusing on the best homes, the 60% I was talking about, scale, and working really effectively with our partners to be able to bring our offering to customers at a lower cost.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would call us Europeans for a new and different definition of the word innovation, right? Quite often, innovation in Europe is seen as, making a turbine 3% more efficient, and then you get a whole bunch of subsidies for that, and that's clearly not the gap that we have, right? In regards of our heat pump targets. So the gap that we have is to become much more efficient on that installation and post-factory value chain steps. And we, for instance, we are going to have a project with the Federal Energy of Disruptive Innovation in Germany, kind of like the ARPA-E of similar to that in the US, to really cut down installation time,
mm-hmm.
right? Essentially, a heat pump installation is a multi-trade installation. You need somebody to work on the water bit, on the electrician bit, and then if it's an air source heat pump, you set a foundation for the outside, right? And that in itself needs to be understood as there is innovation needed for that, and companies like us drive that. But I think it would help all of us to really broaden that innovation definition or notion of innovation.
Awesome. So we are right at time. Philip, I finished with, when Greg left, I asked him, what are we going to be talking about when we're here in 2025? I'm going to ask you the same.
Well, in addition to what he said, I think we will be learning that, and as a company certainly will do that next year, that PV battery and heat pump and thus home energy management systems and thus the connection to the grid and optimization of consumption versus production, that will be one product, right? Mm-hmm. So our vision is a year from now to be able to offer that for, let's say, 350 euros a month, everything included, and we really take care of everything and anything around your home. And that is gonna really reduce the burden on the grid, because I really don't like that risk, to be honest, for our societies, that we rely on hundreds of gas grid operators to drive innovation over the next 10, 15 years. I much rather like the risk that, companies like us are, whether we are able to scale or not, right? So, and that's probably in 25 we'll be looking at, hopefully, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time. Phil, it's been great to have you. Amy, you've done a phenomenal job stepping in. We're so lucky to have had you here, and thank you so much.
It's great. Thanks, Meredith.